Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. Now the Deputy Prime Minister can take the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful city. It's great to be in the final, particularly as I'd forgotten my ticket and I almost didn't get in. I was very pleased with the challenge laid down by Mr. George that we should prove in every example Western countries were always evil. And you know what? I'm not going to even take up that challenge. I can concede that not in every example are they always evil. Neither am I going to deal with a truistic point that merely because sanctions against South Africa damaged trade, that proved they weren't motivated by cynical reasons. Every item of sanctions always damages trade. That's what sanctions means. It means not trading. So every time you go against a country through sanctions, you're harming your trade. But there are sometimes duplicitous reasons why this is enacted. And I can explain that even in the context of South Africa. Why don't we have sanctions against Nigeria? Why don't we have sanctions against Zaire? It's because there are cheap populist points to be made from attacking a regime which appears to be white and racist, where there are fewer points to be made from attacking a black dictatorship which treats its people just as cruelly. No, thank you. Now, that's not a very popular thing to say, that's not a very trendy thing to say, but it's right. It's easy if you're America and you have lots of Cuban exiles in Florida and you need to take Florida in the primaries. It's easy to say, oh, we hate Cuba. It's slightly more difficult to challenge Israel when you rely on the Jewish vote too. No, thank you. So we have systems where people play to their minority groups. And I ask them seriously, do they think if America had a massive Arab minority, as important, as rich, as successful and as populous as the Jewish minority, whether it would still have the same policy on Israel? No. So we do see America playing duplicitous tactics. We do see it's easy for Robin Cook in Britain, the foreign minister, to say, oh, we're against landmines, because most people in Britain don't know that South Korea needs them. It's easy for Arab states to play up to Arab nationalism. It's easy to say, oh, we're going to have sanctions against Iraq, because that makes you look tough. Why aren't they against Syria, which America says is a terrorist state? And why, if they're so wonderful to the people and so kind, did death rates go up? Yes.
So what you're saying is because we can't change the entire world all at once, we shouldn't do it a little bit at a time?
No. I'm pointing out two things. Firstly, inconsistency is wrong in itself. Secondly, it makes you look stupid. And thirdly, it actually makes your policy unworkable. As President Mitterrand of France said about his cabinet, if I got rid of all the adulterers, I'd only be left with women and homosexuals. If you get rid of all the human rights abusers, you will kick out, for a start, let's just begin at the top. India, which has a human rights problem in Kashmir, no thank you. Russia, which has banned all but 4 religions, and China, which does nasty things to people in Tibet. That's over half the globe you've started with. And we could come to Europe, and my partner already did, pointing out Britain's human rights abuses, but again, we could turn to other countries. So it's an unworkable policy, and on that point, I'll take you.
Well, you just mentioned the example of China, and you mentioned at the beginning of your speech that there's been some great Western backlash against moral foreign policies, and yet, precisely last month, Jiang Zemin went to Washington and sorted all this out. They are trading with them.
Yes, and in China, they're having one policy, and in Russia, they're having another, and in India, having another, and it's inconsistent. Why are they punishing, no thank you, why are they punishing Cuba and not punishing China? It's because it's easy, and because it gets votes, and because it costs less money. The same reason they punish South Africa, and they don't punish Nigeria. But even if they did do it to everybody, and therefore isolate themselves completely, it would still be wrong, because we believe that engagement politics works. No, thank you. The second argument I want to attack, other than this motivation point, is this notion that one should always do what the people want, as if in a democracy exists to pander to popular prejudice. No. In democracy, representatives should take hard decisions that sometimes their people might not want to stomach. Sometimes kindness can kill, and it does kill in Cuba, and it does kill in Iraq, when you have sanctions against countries and it hurts the people. Sometimes it is cheap to pander to populism, and it's better to take the hard decision and say we have to trade with China, we have to trade with Cuba, and we do have to trade with countries like Turkey, which also abuse their human rights. The second argument that they put forward, which is that it doesn't harm. It doesn't harm to be outside. It doesn't harm. So if Germany had just completely abandoned contacts with Croatia, it wouldn't have made a difference. It wouldn't have made it easier to get them to the table. If we hadn't been trading with Turkey because we'd said, oh, we don't like the way they treat the Kurds, we wouldn't have been able to station air bases in Turkey in order to win the Gulf War. Now, when we started being nice to Turkey, we didn't know there was going to be a war between Iraq and Kuwait. We knew the Middle East was unstable, and we know the world is unstable. And so it's better to have less enemies and more friends. No, thank you. So it does harm, and we see it harms not only the people in those countries, it also harms the country enacting the moral foreign policy. And it also is duplicitous. The third argument that we put forward is taken directly from their language. There's nothing wrong in a system in which the West benefits and the East benefits. That just because we think the West would benefit from trading with these countries, it doesn't mean that trade is our sole motivation. We think they will benefit from it too. Do you think that the World Trade Organization would have managed to reduce tariffs around the world from an average of 15% to an average of 2.5% if it had said, oh, but we have to take into account how you treat people in your country? No, it wouldn't. It made its only objective securing open markets. That has increased world stability, because when you have high tariffs, you create causes for conflict. That has been historical truth. And it also has the democratizing effect of capitalism, because property is power, and when property is in the hands of the people, then the state is less powerful. And it's in those regions of China, for example, where we have free trade, that we also have free newspapers. And we also have freer speech than we have in those areas of China in which we still have command economics. So when you free up markets, when you open up society, you have the democratizing effect of capitalism. You also have stability. It is not good for the world if we have tighter and tighter competing trade blocs who exclude and who have high barriers against the outside. It's much better if we have free trade, and that can only be achieved if we don't take into account each other's human rights records, because all of us have blood on our hands and smell slightly badly. And it does harm people. It does harm those countries on whom you enact this moral and foreign policy, this kindness that kills, like as it does in Iraq and as it has in Cuba and as it did in South Africa, we maintain. And also, there is nothing wrong with our system which maintains absolute benefit. So my partner's points about Henry Kissinger politics, and yes, he wasn't nice, and yes, he did leave his wife, and yes, he wasn't nice about Indonesia, but it was important to maintain stability, about consistency, which says his policy is unworkable, irrational, and irresponsible, and about the democratizing effect of capitalism, impossible if you stick to moral and foreign policy. All these reasons maintain, all their reasons fall down, and for those reasons, I beg to propose.